Why do people develop hatred of those who are different? Why do people deliberately hurt each other? How do we end up with millions of people dead simply because of the group that they belong to? These are difficult questions, and there is much more work to be done to fully answer them, if indeed we ever really can. However, there is a common pattern that violence against group tends to follow, and that pattern is known as the pyramid of hate. What is the pyramid of hate? It's a structure for understanding how conflict can develop in groups of people and cause hate and hateful actions to escalate. Learning about the pyramid of hate will help us to identify the pattern that hate and violence tend to follow. This can help us work to stop violence early before it spins out of control and hurts thousands or even millions of people. As you can see, the pyramid of hate has 5 levels. The bottom levels are foundational, which means they must be in place for the upper levels to exist. Also, more people tend to exhibit the behavior in the bottom levels. And as the pyramid gets smaller as you go up, fewer people in a society tend to exhibit or accept the behaviors that are higher in the pyramid of hate. The arrow shows that as you go up the pyramid of hate, the amount of hate and usually the amount of violence increases as well. We'll work from the bottom up to the top to learn about the pyramid of hate. The first level is composed of prejudiced attitudes. As we can tell by its position on the pyramid, most people have prejudiced attitudes that they may or may not be aware of. And these attitudes don't involve a great deal of hate. So, what are they? Where do they come from? Well, prejudiced attitudes come from allowing stereotypes to impact how we view members of certain ethnic or religious groups. What are stereotypes? Good question. Stereotype is assuming something to be true about a person based solely on the group that that person is perceived to belong to. Another way of saying this is judging people by their appearance or actions in an oversimplified, generalized, and usually negative way. I want to give you some real life example of prejudiced attitudes, but before I do, I wanted to make sure that I said I don't agree with these stereotypes as correct, and I certainly don't want to offend anyone. So please take them just as examples. Our first example is a pretty easy one. All people with glasses are nerds. Now, some nerds may wear glasses, but certainly not all people who wear glasses are nerds. Our second example, all Asians are smart. Certainly, many people who are of Asian heritage are very intelligent. That doesn't mean everybody who is Asian has to be. And our third, much more negative example is that all Muslims are terrorists. While some terrorists claim to be Muslim, certainly not all the world's Muslims are terrorists. And so these are examples of stereotypes and prejudice attitudes. I wanted to be able to give you some examples in a more lighthearted sense than a lot of the real world examples would be. So I'm pulling from the Harry Potter universe to give you some examples of the Pyramid of Hate. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with Harry Potter. If you are, you're going to recognize this young man in the picture as Draco Malfoy, who is one of the bad guys in the Harry Potter world. And one of the things that makes Draco a bad guy is his attitude toward wizards and witches with non magical parents. These witches and wizards are referred to as Muggle-born throughout the series. And as Draco, the bad guy, meets Harry, the hero, for the first time at Hogwarts, their school, he shares his feelings about the Muggle-born in this quote: "I really don't think they should let the other sorts in, do you? They're just not the same. They've never been brought up to know our ways. Some of them have never even heard of Hogwarts until they get the letter. Imagine. I think they should keep it in the old wizarding families." Pretty clearly a prejudiced attitude about witches and wizards who have non-magical parents. Next up on the pyramid of hate, we have acts of prejudice. From its position on the pyramid, we can tell that this level involves fewer people, but more hate. A prejudice action occurs when a person does something to hurt another person or a group based on stereotypes and prejudice attitudes. You can kind of see the foundational nature of the bottom layer of the pyramid of hate here, because your prejudiced actions would come from a prejudiced attitude. So you can't have the action until the attitude is there. What are some examples? Well, calling others hurtful and negative names based on the group they belong to, telling hurtful jokes that make fun of others based on stereotypes, putting down somebody because of the group that he or she belongs to, or avoiding someone because of the group they belong to. All of those would be prejudiced actions. In the Harry Potter universe, Harry's good friend Hermione has non-magical parents, and Draco, our bad boy, calls Hermione a mudblood on several occasions. Now, mudblood is a mean derogatory term for a witch or wizard with non-magical parents. And as I mentioned before, Draco calls Hermione and other people that on several occasions. He also calls Harry a muggle lover. And both of those terms are meant to be hurtful. They're meant to be mean and to put the other person in a lower social position. So we're moving from negative thoughts to negative actions as we go up the pyramid here. Next on our pyramid of hate, we are looking at the third level, which is discrimination. Discrimination involves treating people unfairly and denying them equal rights because of the group that they belong to. So this is more serious, perhaps, than a mean joke or a mean word. Now we're starting to take some rights away. And so examples of this are refusing to let a person go to a school because of the group that they belong to. And of course, we know that happened in the United States through most of the 20th century in the South when they segregated schools into white schools and colored schools. Another example would be refusing to give a person a job because of the group that they belong to. This happened a lot with women during most of the 20th century and history before. They couldn't have certain jobs, doctors, lawyers, because people perceived them as not able to do it because of some negative attitudes and stereotypes. And finally, refusing to let a person buy a house or rent an apartment because of the group they belong to is also discriminatory. In Harry Potter's world, if Hogwarts, the school, had followed the Malfoy's family suggestion and banned Muggle-born witches and wizards from entry, Hermione could not have gone to Hogwarts, and this would have been an example of discrimination against Muggle-born witches and wizards. Another example of discrimination occurs in the last book in the series, The Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort, who's the main villain in all of this, has taken over the Ministry of Magic, the government for the wizarding world, and he requires all Muggle-born witches and wizards to be registered with the Muggle-born Registration Commission. And this, of course, is the first step to being able to set them apart and start to deny them rights based on their non-magical parents. As we continue to go up the pyramid of hate, we reach the fourth level, and that's violence. It's important to note that the level of hate is high, though the number of people involved is lower. However, the threat of violence can intimidate those who think that violent actions are wrong, but they don't want to get hurt themselves. And so even though the number of people participating in violence is lower, other people are intimidated and they end up sort of inadvertently supporting it. What are some examples of acts of violence? Well, these are like it sounds, there's acts that hurt a person physically or emotionally, again, just because of the group that they belong to. Some examples: physical assaults, beating somebody up because they belong to a group, or murdering them because they belong to a group. Bombings. Black churches in the South have been bombed for over 100 years as a way of trying to intimidate African Americans into stopping a push for civil rights. Vandalism of important memorials or buildings. Jewish synagogues and memorials are many times vandalized as a way of trying to intimidate and hurt members of the Jewish faith. And last but not least, acts of terrorism. Probably the best example I can give you there is when the KKK burns a cross in the front yard of an African American family. That's meant as a symbol. That's meant to intimidate and to terrorize those individuals, and that is an act of violence. Now, in the Harry Potter universe, it's a little harder to kind of come up with something that's quite this bad, but there is something that's really kind of disturbing when you stop and think about it. In, again, the book The Deathly Hallows, Professor Umbridge, who's the lady in pink here, is a witch who believes in Voldemort's mission to rid the world of mudbloods. and she is participating in the interrogation of a Muggle-born witch, Mary Cattermole, who is the woman kind of in the chair below her who looks intimidated and is in gray. And under Voldemort, their new policy is that wizards and witches who don't have wizard parents must have stolen their wands and their magic. So they can be prosecuted and imprisoned because clearly they're criminals. So this is a way of making a perfectly law-abiding fine witch or wizard into somebody who can now be punished. And of course, this claim is false, and everybody knows it. But gee, if I stand up for these people, maybe they're going to investigate my background, and I could get in trouble too. So again, people are intimidated against trying to stop this. And Umbridge uses this law to degrade Mary Cattermole, and she not only takes away her wand, but her identity as a witch and her right to practice magic. And so this is an act of violence because it really kind of destroys who this woman is and who she thought she could be, and strips away everything that was important to her. As we get to the top of the pyramid of hate, we have genocide. And clearly, this will involve an incredible amount of hatred. And though the number of people who actively participate in the genocide is small, other people have now been intimidated into letting it happen. And the best analogy I can give you is bystanders in a bullying situation. People can watch bullying happen and they think it's wrong, but they don't want to get bullied themselves, so they just stand by and let it happen. In the Harry Potter universe, genocide is what Harry and his friends are fighting to prevent. Voldemort, remember the big evil guy, and all his followers were trying to eliminate all Muggle-born witches and wizards to purify the wizarding bloodline. But thanks to the efforts of Harry and his friends, they stop Voldemort before he's able to do this. However, in real life, sometimes the heroes can't do enough to stop genocides. Genocides are a deliberate, systematic extermination of a group of people based on the racial, ethnic, or cultural group they belong to. And here you have just 4 examples of the hundreds that you can pull from history. You can see that the Holocaust is in there, and we'll be learning about that, of course, in the next couple of weeks. It is, to date, the genocide with the largest number of victims. However, you can see that Holocaust happened before and after the Holocaust. So sometimes we wonder, what can we do? They keep happening. What can we do? Why do we bother? Why look at the pyramid of hate? And I think there's several reasons to keep learning about genocides. And a couple of them are communicated by these 2 quotes. The first quote, which I think is fairly well known, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." This quote reminds us that though history doesn't repeat itself fact for fact, there are patterns to history. And if we can see the pattern in the pyramid of hate, we can help take action to stop it before it spins out of control. The second quote reminds us that we do have the ability to make the world a better place using what we can learn from history. And that's why it's important to learn about the pyramid of hate. Thank you for listening.